It's 5:45, so we're going to start the second workshop with Catherine. For the last workshop of the day, we all going to stay here. Don't have to move to the other room. And she wants us to stand up, so I think we need to stand up. Not yet, not yet, not yet. After she explained the workshop, so we could stand up to do our discussion together, and we have some paper to distribute to you during the workshop. So if everybody wants to listen to Catherine, and then after that, we stay in the same group, but we stand up.
Okay, thank you, Sylvie. So I've done this workshop before with a small group of people and lots of helpers and not jet lag. So we'll see how it goes. So I've already mentioned that the Welsh legislation provides us with a new impetus in Wales to work across the sectors, to reach out to different parts of government, to engage with civil society for the benefit of health and all policies. So I mentioned that as a civil servant working on various pieces of legislation, the skills that I found particularly helpful in that role were things like tenacity, diplomacy, the ability to seize opportunities, especially about making the business case for intervention and action. So we know that we talked about action on sustainable development goals. This is about acting on the determinants of health and well-being, thinking about the political decisions and our public policies. So we can either think about how they impact on health in a negative way or in a positive way. But how we explain that, how we lobby, and how we navigate to influence our politicians and our fellow stakeholders and intersectoral actors, again, it's a kind of skill set that we need. So against this backdrop, and knowing that we have a whole set of skills that are now enshrined in the legislation and that we have to respond to, I mentioned that I commissioned a literature review, which is really about how we put those 5 sustainable development principles into action. So I wanted to find out if there were case studies, practical lessons, ideas and approaches that would be useful for public service and all public service staff to help them implement. So I've got a short video just to show you some of the information in the literature review, and then I'm going to get you to put some of that into action. And I've cut some of it out, so it starts a bit suddenly.
Of the area the public body serves.
Those ways of working are a unique aspect of our legislation, and they are seen as essential to securing our long-term sustainability, helping us to avoid making past mistakes and tackling some of the long-term and very complex challenges that we face. So in our role in the Health and Sustainability Hub, where we're trying to support implementation, we commissioned researchers at Kingston University to undertake an extensive survey of the literature so that we could identify approaches, methods that can work and offer public bodies ideas, practical lessons, actual examples and sources of information in order that we stimulate more action on the ground. The result is a valuable evidence base which takes each of the ways of working in turn and provides some key lessons and learning about what to do and what to avoid.
Perhaps one of the most important findings is the endorsement of the legislative approach we have taken in Wales. The review ranks the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act favourably when compared to the main reasons that policy typically fails. It also highlights the positive and catalytic combination of a rights-based approach and a development agenda, alongside the weight of the scientific evidence in relation to climate change. Because the Act places clear legal duties on public bodies, but is still non-prescriptive to allow for tailoring to local circumstances, it is shown to promote innovation, The holistic and comprehensive nature of the Act is seen as impressive, as it incorporates within its 7 goals all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, the Welsh Act redefines sustainable development as it includes an additional 4th pillar: social, environmental, economic and cultural well-being. This again is seen as an enabling factor as it fits with the country context. So overall, the literature review is positive about the relevance, intent and breadth of the legislation, saying that it really is unique and we should make the most of it as a game changer.
So the review is positive about the Act being an enabling framework for action, but the 5 recommendations from the review really focus our attention on delivery. The first is ensuring there is visible integration between people, policy and practice. This captures how we need to make the most of our workforce as agents of change, who understand their individual and their team role and can confidently implement the ways of working. Then there should be a strong connection between what they do and how they are supported by institutional policies and plans. Organisational communications, training, relevant targets, job descriptions, appraisals. So in practice, this is about taking consistent and practical steps to make the commitment at all levels visible, so it can support and motivate others to implement. This is taken one step further by the second recommendation about how we need to target our interventions to ensure that the Act is being operationalised at different levels. For individuals, now whether that's a member of staff, a citizen, a service user, there should be opportunities or tailored interventions to enable them to learn, experiment and share expertise with each other on the ways of working. For teams, the chance to come together, to reflect, to learn and encourage implementation in a safe to fail environment. For organisations, they need to exploit the various ways that the aspirations of the legislation can be mainstreamed through institutional policies, for example through leadership and all standard operating procedures. Finally, a really important message is that these different levels, individual, team, organisation and system, should not be targeted in isolation. The literature review is really clear about this. Success depends on interaction and mutual reinforcement. Practically speaking, for example, this could mean consistent staff awareness and training programmes made available for all staff at induction level, through leadership management, through board development, cabinet or committee level. In the literature review, you can find several case studies from a broad range of sectors where you'll be able to see where this has been done and put into practice.
Public bodies should be reassured that all the 5 ways of working interplay and overlap, so it doesn't really matter which one you start with. Public bodies should start where they feel the most comfortable and have the most experience. There is also a recommendation about how to build capacity in organisations and change culture. This involves gathering new data or combinations of data which reflect on what is working and what is not working, and using this evidence to inform change. This in turn helps to create new narratives on what constitutes success, which can be communicated both internally and externally to staff and stakeholders, which ultimately drives and builds capacity.
I think it's really helpful that throughout this review, the recommendations always bring us back to what we can do to make sustainable development an everyday reality, not just an ambitious concept. There's lots of practical ideas.
At the individual level, we can conduct baseline surveys to assess comprehension and motivation to act, staff appraisals that link to and reflect aspiration, involving staff members in the creation and development of organisational objectives. All these things help enhance and sustain motivation. Peer mentoring schemes can also be offered to build capacity, equipping staff with the necessary knowledge and skills to improve their implementation of the 5 ways of working.
At the team level, we are talking about creating opportunities to collaborate and share knowledge and experiences, including regular meetings and workshops. Team simulation activities were noted as a way to promote experimentation, with annual staff conferences and reward schemes as a way to showcase team achievements, identify progress, and demonstrate good practices.
I think the recommendations in the review are really helpful, but there are 5 simple daily practices that staff members anywhere across the public body can adopt, and they're easy to remember and speak to all of us. They are wake up, be informed about the impacts of the new ways of working, and be alert to simple changes that can be made now or planned and phased in. Wise up, learn new knowledge, skills and behaviours to help embed the 5 ways of working in your daily practices. Also, share experiences with others and experiment to find solutions. Sharpen up, develop new evidence, metrics and measurements that reflect current and future well-being. Show up, lead in your existing field of influence, and even though you may not have all the answers, ask questions and collaborate to find the answers. And finally, shout up, communicate what is working and what we can expand upon, and share new stories of experimentation and learning.
So, what are the next steps?
An immediate next step we're going to take at the Health and Sustainability Hub is to use the findings of the literature review and produce a series of products and tools which can help us all drive. Thank you. Because I'm here to tell you that. Anyway, so I think some of the findings are really useful. And I looked at, went through our kind of literature about health in all policies, and they really chime with what we've been saying works to deliver and implement a health in all policies approach. So we're talking about leadership at all levels, leadership that looks outward, provides space and opportunities for staff. We need to allow them to have that stretch, encourage dialogue, support experimentation, innovation. We need to create an environment for culture change and new practices. So leveraging those decision-making structures, different levels of operation, communicating across and throughout organisations, and having a clearly articulated and shared vision. So that's some of the learnings from the Health in All Policies literature, and as I said, chimes very much with our recommendations. Have you got the presentation? No, these slides.
Is it the right one?
Yeah, that one, but we'll just... I'm just going to... So, I won't go through, I was going to go through the recommendations in more detail, but I won't do that now, so I think everyone's quite tired and we can get on to the more practical exercise. But just to tell you now where we're hoping to disseminate these findings, there's the link if you want to have a look at the literature review, and it's got the main report, an executive summary and an infographic that we've developed with some of those findings. So we're working with our colleagues in the WHO through various networks, Global Network for Sustainable Development, plus ourselves, this network, and also the Regions for Health network and small countries, as well as the joint action that I mentioned earlier. So we hope to get maximum reach with these findings and help certainly some of the transferability of them across into different contexts. So the findings of this literature review are really helping us inform a kind of series of products and guidance and tools. If you think back to that recommendation about how we operationalise sustainable development, we've been trying to think about how we can encourage the ways of working at those different levels. So particularly around individual behavioural change and team behavioural change. So the first thing that I'm going to introduce to you is the prompt cards for decision making and thinking outside the box. So this is our attempt to try and get people in their everyday settings to think about how they're going to implement the 5 ways of working in their everyday activities. So these prompt cards have been developed with International Futures Forum, who have a speciality in terms of looking at how we think about futures and how we engage with complexity. They've been designed to work with our SIFT workshop, which we'll come on to doing, but I thought it would be helpful to start with the prompt cards because they've been designed to use in a particular workshop, but I think they are quite unique at being standalone. So, before we start, I'm just going to show you a bit of an intro to the prompt cards because I think they're quite difficult to sort of think about what you're going to do with them. But here's Graham, and he's just explaining to how we can use them as a sort of can opener, a getting to know you.
That the literature review, the dense literature review, all the knowledge is in there, but you're not going to turn up and leaf through that. The workshop, the SIFT workshop, is a way of translating that knowledge into practice. Come along, it'll take 2 hours, it's a facilitated process, step by step, here's the guide. The aim at the moment is to try and make sure that that can facilitate itself. And also, when the workshop's over, what happens next? I can remember that. Or what about the people that weren't there? So we thought actually a set of cards like this, drawing on the literature review, drawing on the SIFT workshop, might be useful both to animate the workshop, make it easier for it to be self-facilitated. It's much easier to say, at this point, everybody pick a card and respond to it. And then at this point, somebody prompt a creative conversation. It just makes it easier. And it's also something you can take away with you. So here is the wisdom. Here is the wisdom of all of that research and experience, and I can carry it in my pocket now. We are talking about a pattern of thinking and working, and all of these ways of working are interrelated. So it's not surprising that we can't tell. That it could be in here, it could be there. And for me, that's one of the advantages of shuffling the deck and not being stuck in the silos. We can't tick the box if we don't know which box we're ticking. There are 52 cards, naturally. It's trying to use things that we're familiar with to shift into these unfamiliar patterns. So we know what to do with a deck of 52 cards. We shuffle them, we deal hands, we do this kind of thing. 52 is the right number. If it were 80, it would be difficult to do the shuffling. There are 2 jokers, because of course the pack always had 2 jokers. Those are blank cards. Make of those what you will, but the jokers are in there as well. So you'll get familiar with some of them. And they are egalitarian. Everybody knows, let's have a game of cards. And it kind of shifts roles. So there is a dealer, and we start on the left, and we go around. So there are patterns that we can play into that might break the normal ones. So that's right. And this thing about, what does it mean? It means this to me. I'm going to play this because it gives me a chance to ride my hobby horse. But at least I'm now aware that that's what I'm doing. There's something about the neutrality. These are statements. They're all statements. They're not questions. There aren't any correct answers. They're statements, and inevitably we're making the meaning out of them. But hopefully, that's the other part of it, that we become reflective practitioners. That we are actually reflecting on the kind of contribution we're making. And and that, oh, you know, that means this to me, but somebody else, it means something completely different to somebody else. I had no idea. You know, and we're both right. So the first exercise, just to get familiar with each other and with some of the cards, and this is something that we do with the IFF prompt cards, is just use these as a device for checking in. And so everybody gets to pick a card at random and say, you know, introduce yourself and say something about how that card is relevant for you and your work. You know, what does that say? Has this got any relevance to who you are and what you do professionally? It can very quickly develop into a conversation about ways of working and thinking that are relevant to you know, sustainability and the Future Generations Act. Also, a lot of the statements are kind of framed as shifts. You know, this rather than that. And of course, really, it's always this and that. You know, we should do both. It's not that we give up everything we know in order to shift to this way of working. But they're articulated as shifts in our default patterns of working. So if, you know, the ways of working that are articulated in the Act and the ways of thinking that are implicit in it were the default, then we wouldn't need the Act in the first place. You know, so there are default ways of thinking and acting and behaving. And it's not that we don't know how to do any different, we do. But we're usually not encouraged to do that. So all of these are like little nudges and prompts to, well, you know, what about that other way of thinking that and working that we know how to do, but we're usually not encouraged to.
Okay, that's it. All right, everyone.
The thing I want to do is
we stop that there then, thank you. Okay, so this, so the pack of cards, as Graham said in the video, you can take it with you, you could take it along to a meeting, use it as a bit of a can opener, an icebreaker, but there are other ways, so the video, we've developed it so we can actually say to people, if you want to use the cards, there are 4 or 5 ways you can use them. So another way is strategy poker. So you're actually given a set of cards and you're in your scenario or problem or looking for a solution, you can use the cards to kind of trump other people's solutions. And that's not in a negative way, but that's in a way just that stimulates the subconscious. So what we're trying to do is kind of ask people to kind of reflect on the kind of ways they've always done things and maybe think about doing things in a different way. So it just adds a bit of creativity and stimulates you to think, maybe think and act a bit differently. So again, just ways to think about approaching things differently or having a different conversation. And sometimes that's with people we see a lot, we work with a lot, but we'd like to change the status quo. Okay. So the next one, on your tables, you'll have a SIFT workshop. And I'm sorry, some of you got they haven't quite come out. They're meant to look like this, A4, colour photocopies, but we had some problems with the photocopier. So you've got whatever size that is, I'm not sure. But they're meant to look like this, and this is a 2-hour workshop that we've developed to support teams in public service to implement the ways of working. But I think with the legislation, there's a real risk that it becomes a very compliance-orientated exercise, that, you know, people just hit the box and don't really try to change the way they do things. So we've looked at quite a lot of theoretical learnings and knowledge about how organisations learn, how they improve, and we've tried to incorporate those findings in this workshop. So it's based on a lot of organisational development methodology, also a lot of health methodology around quality improvement. So it's pretty much looking at your normal PD essay cycle, plan, do, study, act. And the idea is, if you'd like to try a new idea or work in a different way, you can do that. It allows you to explore that, try it, come back as a team and discuss the results of that. So it's not a one-off. You don't do the workshop and think, that's it, I've done 5 ways of working, it's finished. It's meant to be iterative. So the idea is the team would come together maybe every 6 months or even more frequently to kind of look at what they're doing differently. So the feedback so far is that many of the participants, we've tried it with about 100 people so far across public service in Wales, and the feedback, it's helping people feel a bit more confident about the ways of working and how they might implement it. 2 hours was pretty much what people were prepared to commit, and we thought that that also fitted in maybe with your kind of, not your very quick team meeting that you have, but your sort of more, your longer sort of team planning agenda. So to make the most of the time available for teams, it's helpful, there's quite a lot of pre-workshop information. It's helpful to think about the team, any particular issues that the team might want to address. It's also, there's a pre-assessment questionnaire that the team does to assess readiness for change. And it's really helpful that from our experience when this workshop is kind of positioned in terms of what the overall organisation is doing along this agenda for sustainable development and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Otherwise it just appears a bit hollow, so you need to kind of remember the findings from the literature review about people's policy and practice. You need to kind of make sure there's a coherence to what you're doing. That's when it really works well, so people can see, I know why I'm doing this, I know the potential difference that it could make, and I see the kind of logic. So, skip that. So the workshop, as I say, pre-workshop reading, so we would encourage a team to kind of look at that, maybe about 2 weeks before they're coming together as a team. Then there's a whole series of exercises that the team would do within the workshop and follow-up. So, it's quite difficult to do this, and you normally do it with a team that work together, that see each other all the time. We don't come into that category, but it's the kind of thing I just thought I'd run past the main elements of the workshop so you get an overview. And I think there's probably enough for everyone to have a look at a copy. So, the first... So the first slide shows the Discover section. So that's from about page 14. This is the most chunky section, thinking about what you already do as a team. You come together to review that. And this is all about taking a strength-based approach. So we know in terms of the literature that focusing on what we do well, where we've had some good and positive experiences, is the best way to improve and learn. So there's a number of questions there that would enable the teams to the Discover to think about that and think about how the ways of working are currently being operationalised in what they do. Then there's a kind of Dream and Delve section, designed to explore, well, if we could do anything, if structures, money, people, legislation, lack of policy coherence, if all of those things were not there, what would we do differently? So you really want to, this is your sort of blue skies moments, you really want to think about, well, in an ideal world, we would do X, Y, Z. And it's important that somebody takes notes at the time, you identify somebody who'd facilitate the workshop and note taker. That doesn't have to be the manager or the team lead, it could be anyone in the team. So it's not a hierarchical process. So after doing the Dream and Delve section, you can move on to and we've got the timings for all of those sections, so you'd know how long to spend on it. And then we come to the design section. This is where we're thinking about turning those bright ideas that have been had into sort of more tangibles. Now, the expectation is in that 2 hours you don't have a fully worked up plan, but you kind of start thinking towards that, and you look about, you you want to be looking at the kind of outcomes that you're thinking about, the kind of measures, and then moving towards a plan. And it could be then you come back together as a team to kind of decide that's the plan we're going to do, and we decide to implement it. And then you look at, timescales and so on, and when you're going to come back to review. So again, it's difficult with this number of people to go through the workshop, but the idea is very reflective and it's very participative. So that's the idea behind it. Now we all know we've worked in teams over, not enough time to do those. We've worked in many teams, and sometimes we've worked with people for a long time, and maybe it's a bit difficult to get conversations to flow, and maybe we get a bit stuck in the ways we work together. So that's where the original idea of the prompt cards came from. So in your workshop, where you see the kind of globe icon, that's where you might turn to the prompt cards. If things are drying up in terms of conversation, or things getting a bit sticky or awkward, you could use the prompt cards, turn those just to liven things up and get people to interact, because it's with that participation and reflection that we start to kind of move forward. So I don't know, maybe in your groups, if you wanted to maybe get into groups of 3, maybe just get into groups of 3 and perhaps choose one of the sections to look at, whether discover, design, dream and delve, and just have a look at some of the questions that you'd be asked. And then we'll do some quick feedback.